Welcome back to the BAPS Better Living podcast, Windows into Wisdom. Today, we're going to be going through episode 2 about discovering who we really are. If you missed the first episode, I really implore you, please pause this video right now. Go to the first video where we discover who we aren't actually. Today, we're going to be tackling the question of, therefore, who am I really? Without further ado, Swami, let's just dive right into it. In the last episode, we ended the conversation along the lines that we may have previously thought of ourselves to be our career, our associations, our achievements. But those are limiting factors in who we truly are. And you left us off with one thought that we should have, that we're devotees of God. And that is the beginning of the journey of discovering who we are, or the less limiting version of who we truly are. So I would like to start off right from there. Why should we start the conversation of that discovery with, I am a devotee of God?
So we all, one of the things that we mentioned in that previous podcast also was that in the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, in the 7th chapter, Bhagavan Shri Krishna explains that if you commit yourself to me, then you can overcome my Maya. So again, a lot of this will be related to what we accept about the nature of things and what we believe in. But if you do believe in the concept of Maya, if you do believe in the concept of Bhagavan, then our relationship within that becomes a little bit easier to pursue. Because now you see that there is a distinction between them. You know that Bhagavan exists. And because you know that there's these two different things, that now it's my job to discover where I am. And so we said that if I am not just these things, all of these things that have been developed from factors of Maya, and what's going to be helping me overcome them is my association here with Bhagavan, then it's natural, or it might be intuitive for us to take that position, that I am a devotee of Bhagavan, I am a member of Bhagavan's family, I am that is my most prominent role, and my most limitless role, in order for me to overcome the limitations of these other roles of Maya itself. So if I believe in that, then it would be intuitive. Now, the nature of belief is something that grows and that has to be nourished and that has to be developed through greater understanding. But if we start in that place where, okay, what are the institutions and ideas that you have some sort of trust in and faith in, well, then that will lead us to here. And if, to some extent, we all have some level of, let's say, allegiance, or we have some sort of faith and trust in Shastra. Otherwise, it would be very hard to even have this discussion. But because we have that, that's the place to start. And we, like we said, we don't want to create a void.
Yeah.
We don't want to empty ourselves. We don't want to create, because that will be filled by tamogun. It'll be filled with rajogun, more likely. We want to strengthen this concept, because what we're trying to overcome is not, as we said, bad. It's limiting. And so if it's limiting, which way is it limiting?
Yeah.
That's most significant to us. And if I understand over time that the pursuit of Bhagavan is the most important thing, or most crucial thing, or the most beneficial thing, then I can accept, okay, these limitations are something I need to overcome. So all of those things are going to point to Bhagavan. Bhagavan as a goal for us, that I want to reach Bhagavan. I want to be a devotee of Bhagavan. And I want to practice my devotion at the highest level. I want to see my identity as this devotee come to a very high level. Right? Anyone can be a devotee, and there are many categories of our devotion and many categories of devotees because of the quality of our devotion. But if I see that it's most beneficial to me to become aware of Bhagwan's identity or the nature of Bhagwan, then it also would be important for me to become the best possible devotee.
So you mentioned that this journey has to have some level of faith and understanding in the scriptures as a launch point, and we're not trying to get into why have faith or what's the benefit of that. The assumption is most of us in the audience who are listening at least understand that faith has a place in my life, and I want to further my journey into that. But what I do want to ask is, and I think I recently came across a study that was done that I think for the first time, in America at least, that less than 50% of people, somewhere in the low 40s, now associate themselves with a given religion. That doesn't necessarily mean people don't want to be spiritual, but they have decided that maybe organized religion or a certain particular sect is not my means. So is this journey also, is it okay to be just spiritual, where I just want to be a good person, do good things, in the pursuit of something potentially higher understanding, higher level of, or limitless version of who I am? Or does it really have to be tied to, not necessarily a particular sect, but the idea that God must be the goal?
I think the way I would go about this question is that the pursuit of Bhagwan is explained by pursuing something that never changes. That which is eternally there, that has the power to influence things, that has the power to be a judicious judge in all circumstances. Furthermore, the Shastras describe Bhagwan as compassionate, as an entity that wants to see every jeev experience success, ultimately. It's just the nature of that success has to be defined by the quality of the journey. And so the journey is always there. And it's something that every jeev must go through. But Bhagwan is there as an entity to encourage that journey, to move forward. So when I come across Bhagwan, these are some of the things that I have to learn about to understand why it's important to put Bhagwan at the center of my pursuit of understanding who I am ultimately. If it's absent of that, if my thoughts of what Bhagwan or what God is just come from popular culture, or from what the discussion forums are saying about God today, that lacks all of this nuance, then there's no value. There's no value to that, because today, more and more, where people are more pursuant of just worldly experiences, they start to see the need to go on vacation, the need to have life experiences that are promoted through things like social media as just, you have to do this once.
Yeah.
Like, you have to jump
The bucket
on a plane.
Yeah.
Everyone has a bucket list. You have to pursue that bucket list. And that bucket list over time becomes more important to pursue. How will my life have value? Well, if I cross off all these things.
But it reiterates the worldly life, if you will, of what we were talking about before. It re-engages what we think is good from an external perspective, not necessarily reevaluating or focusing on the internal journey that we're trying to at least go on.
And that culture and framework now is going to ask the question, is it worth pursuing God as the central focus?
Yeah. So it's coming from a place that is
really, really ignoring what God is.
Yes.
Most of what God is. It's the opposite of this, right? If I see myself with all of these worldly identifiers and identify through that most prominently. And my identity as Bhagwan no Bhakta, or devotee of God, is very, very small. Right? What we're saying is you have to shift that. And the question comes, well, is it really that important? Well, why is that question coming? This requirement of awareness is largely about this.
Okay.
There's a lack of reflection that happens when worldly identifiers become prominent, because we become very superficial. It's just the stuff that we can touch and feel and taste and have the capacity to comprehend that we take into account. And, I can understand that it feels kind of like, hey, how are we talking about the need to prioritize things that we don't have the capacity to comprehend?
Yeah.
Right? I'll make another argument for that. Who's really smart in this world? Is it someone who knows how to do more things? Or is it someone who's more judiciously placed their trust? And the big discussion about faith in God is about this. So who's making the best decisions about who's worthy of your trust? Because I can try to learn how to fix my car, but it would be more intelligent for me to find someone who's trustworthy that knows how to fix my car. Because I might be doing something else professionally. I can't try to learn surgery and learn how to fix my car and to be a top-level chef and to be able to lead government. All of those things, I need to be able to use the power of trust and being able to judiciously place that trust in order to be seen as someone who's accomplished or intelligent or making good choices. The pursuit of Bhagwan is that the ability to have knowledge and to understand language has value, because it gives us the ability to think. But then once you learn how to think, one of the strong arguments for being devoted to Bhagwan is that the Shastras teach us about the nature of Bhagwan, the resilient nature of Bhagwan. As the civilizations and worlds and universes change, how Bhagwan stays. And then it teaches us over time to understand or grasp what the influence of a Bhagwan like that is. It's our limitation that says, hey, prayer is so that I go to the mandir, and when things aren't working my way, I say, hey, Bhagwan, I'm here. Can you make this happen for me? That's our limitation.
Yeah.
The problem is we use that limitation then to further a dialogue in the general discussion forums about, is it really worth spending so much time on Bhagwan? It is. If you read the Upanishad, if you read the Gita to understand what Bhagwan is, or if you're able to at least expose yourself to the more vast understanding of what Bhagwan is meant to be. But if it's limited by just what a few people are saying online about Bhagwan, then no, of course it's not. It's a very limited understanding of what Bhagwan is that is making us question, is it really worth my time?
Got it.
If I know, or if I'm exposed to some great understanding, then the question is, how am I not pursuing this? That's what happens.
Got it. So, Swami, you mentioned how, I think earlier, that learn to think. Is that something that we have to do of our own volition and it's an epiphany? Or is there someone who's kind of helping us guide what that understanding is? Like in the example of Janak that you gave in the previous episode, you mentioned how he had the dream and all of a sudden he's like, there's something amiss with what I thought was real. Is that real, or is this real? Or is that fake, or is this fake? Do I have to wait for an epiphany moment for me to really march down the path of becoming a devotee or bhakta of Bhagwan, to start this journey of awareness of my true self?
So I would argue that Janak's moment, the epiphany didn't come until after he met the Guru, who taught him how to interpret that moment. But what he did have was a strong curiosity that was stirred by that dream, an awakening from that dream. He didn't ignore that curiosity. I think that's what matters here. That if we've had some sort of experience in our life that may be the result of some sort of karma that we've done, or some prarabdha that we were fortunate to have, that creates this moment of like, wait a minute, was that a glitch? What just happened? When that curiosity happens, then you look at the Guru. You look for someone who has the capacity to give us some understanding in that. And Sanatan Dharma teaches us that our prarabdha will lead us to someone who's able to give us some answer towards that understanding.
Sorry if I may interject. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Swami, but you mentioned the word prarabdha and karma. I think karma everyone understands, but what really is prarabdha? Is that a component of karma? Like how are we supposed to understand it without delving too deep into that topic, because that could be a full episode on its own. But in the context that you're mentioning, what are we really referring to when we say prarabdha?
In short, if I was to describe prarabdha, I would say that it's the expression of our past karma that leads to the circumstances that we are experiencing right now.
In this current life.
In this life, right? So prarabdha is the manifestation of past karma that we experience currently, whenever that currently is, right? So my prarabdha leads to the circumstances that are surrounding me right now. And so when you're experiencing that, whatever circumstances that are presenting themselves, all of them have the potential to be opportunities. And at some point, maybe outside of our control, there's a moment of curiosity, something that happens that makes us think, why did this happen? And when we pursue that through some sort of spiritual means, then you have the prospect of Gnan.
Okay.
But I think it's even in a much more generic scenario, let's say practical wisdom, and there are many people who have pointed to this idea. But let's say you have some sort of difficult situation that comes up in life, and that'll make us wonder that what is this life about? If you have that disappointment that happens, that and we experience it all the time. There's so many different levels of this. You look forward to getting, let's say, a new phone, and this is probably less common now, but maybe a few years back, where the launch of a new phone was a big event, and people would sometimes camp out outside of a store overnight.
Yes.
And they get it. And then there was a time where, as soon as the new phone came out, within days there was the rumors about what the next phone will be. Yeah. And so already it's eating at your ability to enjoy what you have, right? Think about that experience. That experience should lead us to believe, hey, should I have been as invested emotionally in getting this phone? And if I don't go through that exercise, then the next year I'll do the same thing and I'll go through the same experiences. And so a lot of people, when they attend a funeral, they will have this experience. They will wonder that, well, what is life really about?
Yeah.
And they'll wonder that, should I be spending as much time in this, that would really allow me to get some value from that? Well, in that moment, that's your moment to pursue knowledge at a deeper level. And that's what happened to Janak. So we all go through this.
Yeah.
It does happen much more frequently than we would assume. It's just there was no one to write a story about it and put it in the Bhagavad,
Yeah.
right? Janak pursued it. And it's our job to pursue understanding on a deeper level when the curiosity comes, or when an event comes that will kind of force us to think. And that's why you have sadhus. That's why you have people who are invested in studying, because they're meant to mentor on this level. If I go to try to understand my negative feelings from the people who are just going to reinforce negative ideas,
Yeah.
then it's a bad idea. Let's say you have an argument with your spouse, and there's two sides to the story, and both people might be right in their own way. But if you go and talk to the people who are going to say, yeah, all women are like that, well, you're not going to get what you need. Maybe you get a little bit of comfort, but you need to grow from that. You need someone who will make you question your position and make you question why you feel what you feel, and try to get both sides of the story.
Yeah.
Right? And so this is similar, that when we experience things in life that make us question what our purpose is, make us question, am I really invested in the right things? That's a good time. It's a good time to open up Shastra. It's a good time to listen to spiritual sermons. It's a good time to find a sadhu that you may know, or even another devotee who you know that this person practices spirituality at a high level. Those are moments to really kind of engage with that curiosity and dig deeper, because it's very hard to otherwise have the right condition of mind to be open to this stuff, because it always seems like, oh, this is too deep for me,
Yeah.
And in the midst of trying to watch this stuff between a YouTube binge, or trying to finish a whole season of some episode of some show that you love, you're not going to be encouraged to think about, who am I on a deeper level.
Yeah.
But when these moments happen in our life where we're encouraged to think about it, that's the moment. That's the moment to really find this source of information.
So does that mean I have to wait for that moment? Like, what if I'm a happy-go-lucky guy, just by nature, my karma, my prarabdha made me a person who just takes life as is, doesn't get too high, doesn't get too low. Not that doesn't describe most people, but do you know what I mean? Like, maybe life doesn't, you don't get life experiences until much later in life, whether that's death or hardship or failure. If I'm a happy-go-lucky teen, or even an adult who more or less had a pretty good life, went to school, got a decent job, have a good family, like, what would be my impetus to think that this journey needs to start now without that event happening?
I'm not saying that you have to wait. I would argue that I think most of us have them more. But I do think that if we try to become at least somewhat self-aware, or try to practice this on some level, even if at the first stage it seems forced, it is likely to create more scenarios for us in the future. And, Sanatan Dharma, the beauty of it is you're never too late to the party. There's no level of impatience where we're going to force this on anybody.
Yeah.
But it does benefit the individual to act on it as early as possible. There's no doubting that. There's no reason to prolong the suffering of ignorance, of delusion. So there is an impetus for this.
Okay.
And that impetus for each person is different. But the way to help create more opportunities or more moments of potential inspiration is to act. You have to act on this. So the moment you learn something like this, I have to take some action on it.
Yeah.
Sometimes just listening to a discussion like this attentively will help create a future moment for us, or make it more likely.
Okay.
But if I listen to this and take some action, if I journal, if I write down, if I take some sort of step, there's no doubt that you will have more moments like this. I think journaling is a very underestimated exercise, and unfortunately, as things like ChatGPT and these things become more prominent, those things might go to the wayside. But I think it's important. I think it's important to meditate. I think it's important to, discipline yourself to have to concentrate and to do deep level thinking. Now, even something like reading books is going to be looked upon as, oh, okay, I have to force myself to read books.
Yeah.
Like we have to, in the past, people would walk for miles and miles and miles, just part of their daily life. And now we have to force ourselves to get a certain number of steps. We have counters and we have watches and we have all these things that help us understand, okay, I have to walk this much. Well, maybe the future's like that. But those are the things that are going to help us. Writing, reading, and reading the type of things that help create this level of awareness. But then also listening to discussions, talking to people who have pursued this knowledge. Shastra has so much importance in our life, and it has so much applicable value. But you have to engage with it knowing that it's going to require depth. It's going to take time. And that's the part of us that is constantly under attack when, our life is so much about swiping and clicking. And you have to fight that urge. You have to treat that as, okay, I have to do this. I have to read the Shastra every day and or very regularly. And when I'm reading it, I have to be engaged with it on a deep level. I need to have to tune things out. And hence we go back to Janak Raja and his ability to just tune things out for a while. Because that's what will intensify those moments of curiosity. And you need it. You need some level of intensity. Because on some level, we probably all experienced that. When even if you've never been to a church or synagogue or temple or mandir, when things happen, you do wonder. When you hear the concept of God on some level, you do wonder. Most people who are agnostic, just because it's more convenient. Not because, they don't want to, but it's too difficult to really pursue the knowledge. And they're just trained to think that, well, I don't have enough time for it. We're just constantly running. But if you can think about it in a way that, this has value for me on a deep level, then you have to make that choice that I need to find things to help intensify this curiosity. Because it's there.
Yeah.
It comes in small doses sometimes. And so it's up to us that when those moments of curiosity come up, to engage with it with some level of depth, and have some sort of practice that helps bring those moments of curiosity further. Because now that I'm on this journey, that I have some sort of recognition that there's value here. So how do I strengthen that? I have to have some process that helps create those moments that need to come up. And then when those moments come, to pursue it through greater engagement with either Shastra or people who have given this sort of commitment to learning more.
So I think you mentioned how a lot of times we don't do it because we think that this is a heavy topic or heavy endeavor, or difficult endeavor, I should say. Maybe I'm reading this wrong, but it also seems very lonely. That this seems like a very individual path that you're taking. That, to your point, you're not shunning your labels as a father, as a son, as a friend, but you also know that I'm not just those things, and therefore, in my discovery of my true self, I need to walk on a certain path that might be lonely. And I think that's what scares a lot of people. Is this path really a lonely path? Like you mentioned, okay, you could read the Shastras, you could meet some Swamis, or you could engage with some people, but how do I even find these communities? Which community do I engage in? Whether online, in person, like how do I know, one, is this a individual path? And if it's not, how can I assess this is the individuals or groups of people who align with my new journey in life?
Okay, that's a great question. I'll tell you what we're making. What kind of trade-off we're making here. In some sense, we all have some community or family that
Yeah.
we might have associated with. There are a few of us who just might be isolated. We might be orphaned at a young age. But even then, we try to find some group that we're a part of. And if we don't, then it's a very difficult existence, for sure. But for all of these people, whether you, by some unfortunate circumstance, are completely by yourself, or whether you're a member of 10, 15 people,
Yeah.
and a very huge family. And then even, let's say, you're part of a bigger community. You're a community of volunteers, let's say, or you're a community of members of a profession that help do charity work. There's a lot of good communities that you can be a part of. The trade-off we're asking for is to say this, that, as we said earlier, we're looking at what are the things that limit us, and how do we break those limits? Well, yes, the process of kind of distinguishing ourselves from those externals might create this temporary state of loneliness, right? But as we said, that we don't want that in the absence of Bhagwan no Bhaktachu, that we don't want that in the absence of I am a devotee of Bhagwan. That thing, once you pursue that further and you recognize Bhagwan's presence and Bhagwan's relationship with everything, you start to see things differently. You start to see animals differently. You start to see plants differently. You see them as creations of Bhagwan rather than just external things that you don't have any connectivity to.
During your lifetime?
Oh, yes. This is, we've seen people look at things differently because of their connectivity with Bhagwan.
Wow.
They express that. When you look at Mahan Swami Maharaj or Pramukh Swami Maharaj, when they were shown things, let's say you show them something that is as physically impressive as the Niagara Falls. Pramukh Swami Maharaj, his first reaction to that would be like, yeah, imagine the creator of this. Because they've associated so strongly all these things that their appreciation for it now has some strong, permanent anchor, right? It's not just that there's water, or a lot of it, or that it's nice, or it's pretty, that it's created by Bhagwan. And they see life in a much more rich way, all forms of life in a much more rich way. They're not limiting people by their aesthetic look. They're not limiting them by their ability or talent or their wealth. They see Bhagwan within that person. And so they're invested in that person's well-being in a way that is much more rich than what we might otherwise. How can I be someone that can be more giving? Well, somehow, if I'm very much locked into my worldly identifiers, then there has to be something in it for me. Even if it's very subtle. Even the most generous forms of giving have some subtle form of a benefit for me that I might actively pursue, or it's subconsciously part of the decision of whether or not I should. Right? Sometimes it's just removing our guilt.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's making ourselves feel better about who we are. Sometimes it's, helping someone who's part of my community, because it helps my community. It helps my nation. It helps the overall progress. Yeah, there are more noble forms of this, but ultimately it's all something that has to have some benefit to me.
Yeah.
And as a Bhakta of Bhagwan, when you see each thing's individual identity as associated with Bhagwan, now you see that as a duty, that why should I be invested in the well-being of this? Well, that has value, has intrinsic value, because it's of its association with Bhagwan. So it's different. You're doing it for a different reason. And yes, it shows up in different, you can measure it from externally. Like, okay, if you're talking about me, Bhaktivardhandas Swami, I'm talking about this, how much do you do for other people, or how many people have you fed? Yeah, you can measure those things externally. But when we're talking about spirituality, what we're saying is that people don't have to be defined by their physical ability, right? You're not defined by how many people you gave food to. What you want is to be, or to seek to be defined by a much deeper sort of identifier. What are your motivations?
Yeah.
What's the intent? What is driving your existence? And that's the enriching aspect of seeing a more complete sense of who you are. That now it's not just physical. It's not just these things that otherwise we are constantly using to gauge who's good and bad. And we keep coming up with new ways to expose the fallacy of this, but it doesn't seem to help us by itself. We see that sometimes people are so generous. They're giving billions of dollars.
Yeah.
But then something comes up later and you find out that, well, they're probably just masking some other really negative part of their personal, being. And despite seeing so many examples, it doesn't change us. We still look at these external things. It's being fortunate enough to be exposed to people who have had this deep connection with Bhagwan and seeing their day-to-day life, where as you understand Shastra more and you examine their life, you get to see how even the act of breathing and staying alive and maintaining their health, it's actually something that they're doing for someone else. But only because their primary self-identifying quality is that I am a devotee of Bhagwan and I'm devoted to all things that are associated with Bhagwan. And they act in that way. And so their every action becomes an act of generosity. Not just these surface level things that we can all measure and gauge. So yes, there's again, this is going to require us to be in a certain frame of mind to appreciate, because we are so used to the more superficial things, more, let's say, tangible things, right? We need that because that helps identify it. But going into spirituality is things like this that, and you can't, I don't have the capacity to measure what someone's motivation is.
Yeah.
Those things always come up later. So we're not here to judge others. We're here to further our journey. But as we do, what we find out is that it's not a lonely enterprise. The more you pursue this, the more interconnected you feel with everything. That now you see your place in the world, and you see that every aspect of the world has value, and you appreciate life more. And you're more alert to the fact that waking up is a miracle. Where it's not just some small thing to have the opportunity to do something good. But that level of self-awareness and just being alert to the miracles that are constantly being experienced, and not just like glossing over them. Again, it's all about this, that am I committed to pursue a deeper level of understanding? Or am I just living for, hey, what's the production? How much are you producing with all this stuff? That's the bigger idea that we have to get over. That it's not, very simply put, there are so many poems and there are so many sermons in the Sanatana Dharma tradition that will ask the question, no one's going to ask you ultimately how many buildings you built. No one's going to ask how many gardens you sponsored. That's not going to be the ultimate thing. The ultimate thing is going to be, did you recognize that pursuing Bhagwan was the greatest thing and the greatest opportunity that this life could have presented to you? And if you recognized it, did you make some sort of step towards trying to aspire towards that? That's what our Shastras teach us. And so this is all related to, making that that aspect of understanding who we are more clear, and distinguishing from those other things that are going to create rationales that get in the way.
So probably have one last question before we wrap up today's episode. It's not a lonely path, you mentioned. There's whether like-minded individuals, satsang, I think that can be said. Whether it's the shastras you're doing, the sang of the shastras, of the guru, or of a learned spiritual leader, these are all ways of which can help us along that path. This is where I'll need your help, right? Because I think you touched on it with the idea of intent. But superficially, on the one hand, when we talked about in the first episode, certain relationships, certain things were helping us build our limited version of ourselves. But in this case, we're now saying that these individuals or sets of people are helping us unpack the unlimited version of ourselves. But externally, it looks like it's still an influence of people. Is that paradoxical, or it still is aligned with how spirituality, or in the pursuit of being a bhakta of Bhagwan, works?
In one sense, it is paradoxical. We're talking about sang, and we're talking about association. So that associations help, or associations are one of the many but most prominent forms of influence on who we are. And because of that, one of the most prominent terms in spirituality, in Sanatana Dharma, is satsang and kusang. And kusang isn't meant to say that it's bad associations, but they are associations that will further the delusion of Maya, and they will just further nourish that aspect of who we are. And so when we're saying kusang, we're saying that, hey, what are the things that are going to further our identification with these sort of worldly labels, these temporary labels that we know are temporary? And what are the things that will, as we said earlier, like what are the things that are unchanging, that are eternally true? And that's where we use satsang as opposed to kusang. So yes, it is paradoxical that in some form it is ultimately about associations. But the reason why satsang is seen as something that will encourage you to find who you are more truly is because of what it's encouraging, right? The nature of what we know as true eternally.
Okay.
True eternally. Not just true today, not just true 10 years ago and it's different now, or something that is true now and 50 years from now will go out of style. What is always true. And so when we say satsang, we say those things that help us get closer to what the Shastras describe to us as Bhagwan. Because, yes, so anyone can be a source of satsang.
Okay.
Anyone can be seen as satsang if they are promoting that which is eternally true.
Okay.
Right? Satsang can come in many forms. A small 4-year-old child can be satsang for me if the child is encouraging me to pursue Bhagwan. That satsang can come in many forms. But what we know is that those people who have had that experience are the strongest forms of satsang.
Okay.
Because even though I might be a mentor to someone who's trying to pursue satsang, and I might be a source for satsang for someone, I might have times where I'm not a good source for satsang. If I'm going through a difficult time in my life and I'm having confusion and my thoughts are kind of random, at that time I might not be a good source for it. Bhagwan Swaminarayan describes a true sadhu, a true ekantik sant, or a satpurush, as someone who never sways from their dharma nishtha who never sways in their understanding of the self as Atma, and who never sways from their devotion to Bhagavan. These three qualifiers are the quality of an Ekantik Sant,
Okay.
or a Satpurush, or someone who is qualified, most qualified, to be a source of satsang for any jiva at all times. And the other sources of satsang might be short-lived, it might come in different forms, and they can, and we should be open to it. But if you can commit to the Satpurush, or a guru who has that realization with Bhagavan, who has these qualities of, complete faith to the person's responsibilities, complete faith in Bhagavan, and complete faith in understanding who they are as the Atma, separate from the body and mind. If you're committed to someone like that, then they can help you find these other sources in a more meaningful way. Otherwise, you're kind of guessing.
Mm.
And you're still open to manipulation, unfortunately. That's an unfortunate reality. That, people who, I might have the ability to inspire people, and I recognize that, and over time, my mind shifts. And I may have had, very altruistic motives early on, but once I saw the opportunity, I may turn into a manipulator. That's par for the course for many people, because so many of the latent base instincts that we haven't dealt with, they don't come to surface until certain opportunities arise.
Or someone there to help point them out to you.
Yes. And if you don't address them, then they can come to surface. And so you want to find a source that's unchanging at all times. And that's why a guru, the Satpurush, matters. They have such a prominent place in satsang. But I want, in my commitment to the Satpurush, I want to be inspired to find satsang in all sources,
Okay.
in all forms where they come. And it's a very enriching experience when that happens.
Swami, I think that encapsulates like our journey into that second half of the conversation about anchoring ourselves to the identity of being a devotee of God, and that, finding that association, it's not a matter of it being a lonely path. Maybe the initial impetus, this initial spark might be of an individual sort, but ultimately the resources, whether the Shastras, the Guru, the Satpurush, and those that he identifies as other sources of Sang, are there to help you along the journey. Are there any final thoughts that you want to share with the audience about, again, anything? Sorry, go ahead. The floor is yours if there's any final thoughts you would like to share.
I would say this is very much the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Yeah. I'd say there's much more to understand about this. And that's the beauty of it. The beauty of it is that the more you learn, the more you understand how much you don't know. People who are trying to understand the scope of the universe often talk about this idea, and spirituality is the same. But it doesn't reduce the fulfilling nature of it.
Okay.
That's what's amazing. Well, and so we're constantly expanding our ceiling the more we learn. And so you're humbled by the experience because you understand there's so much more to pursue. But when you have the support of a strong guru and a strong teacher like the Satpurush, it's not a dark alley that you're walking into.
Okay.
There's always enough light for you to move forward. And so, I think we should all be encouraged for that reason, and be inspired to take that first step and just be a little bit judicious on where to place our trust, and be a little bit courageous in being able to separate from what we might have for years or decades been very confident that this is me. That doesn't have to be you.
Got it.
There's more to you than that.
Well, thank you, Swami. I mean, that was a a long way to look at it, but to your point, it's just the beginning of the journey. But I think a necessary one. I think a lot of times the start is probably the hardest thing.
Yeah.
But hopefully today's conversation and the one from the previous episode helps anyone who's also on that journey of discovering their true self. So for that, thank you so much, Swami.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. I know some of these topics were heavy, but that's the idea of this podcast, to really delve into topics of religion and spirituality in a meaningful way, in a way that we might not have done previously, or with individuals who might be able to help ask the right questions of ourselves. So if you do like this type of content, please do please do subscribe to the channel. And until next episode, namaste and Jai Swaminarayan.